Welcome to the review of All In's podcast number 175. I'm Dom, founder of JoyForge Labs. Let's get into it. Google this week fired a number of employees who were protesting Google's involvement in Israel. And Google took the stance that they were impeding other people's work, broke the company's policies, fired them. The discussion, though, was from an All In podcast perspective, whether there's a shift in Google's woke policies and woke culture. It is important for context as well to understand that during this week, the Golden Gate Bridge was shut down for 4 hours by protesters, also protesting against Gaza. And that seemed to turn against public opinion, was very unpopular, and people actually forcibly removed them. David Sacks points out that whilst the public sentiment might be shifting against this type of protest, he argues that this could be like Vietnam. This could be Israel's Vietnam. Remember, protesters in the early stages of Vietnam were also very unpopular, but eventually were seen as right, as America was unable to win the war in Vietnam. Where I think they could have spent a bit more time explaining or understanding is actually the apartheid that is referred to by these Googlers and by these tech protesters, that they're supporting a government that is implementing really bad policies, and that Google itself should be involved in activism in this case. But they should have gone a bit more into actually what happened in the apartheid in South Africa. The fact that Friedberg and Sacks both have connections to South Africa should give them some insight. It's very interesting to look at that there's both the case for saying, well, companies that withdrew from South Africa place additional pressure and isolation on the South African government, but those who stayed were still able to influence and help the transition out of apartheid. So I think going into more depth around companies' involvement and their influence and what they could be doing to help improve the situation is really, I think, a key debate that could have been had, but unfortunately wasn't. The second topic was on wearables technology, whether it's a good or bad idea, brought about by this brutal review by Marcus Brownlee on the Humane AI's PIN. Him saying this is the worst product ever, when really it's quite difficult to produce a hardware product. It's not the same as producing software. You just spend a whole lot more. And these were ex-Apple executives spending $250 million bringing out this product. Was it unfair to be so brutal, so critical? Some of the debate went around that and said, well, founders shouldn't care and the market, is really going to be giving you feedback. You should use that feedback. So the product itself is quite interesting. I mean, it's a pin you wear on your breast, and you're then able to use hand signals and talk to it, and it'll respond. But really, all the time, it's recording and it's busy giving you feedback. There were issues then around what's the privacy around this, and you're busy recording in public. I'll get back to this in a moment. But really, at the end of the day, the product is really not that good. And how should you judge hardware products was part of the debate. I did mention that Marcus has recently been quite controversial for reviewing a Fisker car, which Fisker is now going into bankruptcy. And they're arguing that this bad review of one of their brand new cars is one of the things that pushed them into bankruptcy. So what's the culpability of reviewers? What role do they play? And do the companies need to ignore them or accept their feedback? Kind of an interesting debate. The discussion continued on to whether wearables are actually a good thing. They mentioned that Google Glass, when it came out, people would take it into bars and they would get into a fist fight because people didn't want to be recorded all the time. And, we have this trouble at the moment of technology being this disintermediating factor between people. Does it make our connections better or worse? And this book by Jonathan Haidt clearly says it makes, at least for children, much worse. Their interactions with the world are being severely hurt by this, and that the pendulum is probably swinging away from wearables, especially those that are going to be quite intrusive in our lives and perform some sort of intermediary function. People are wanting more personal interaction, not less. So the argument then goes around, well, wearables that are going to work, or the products which would work, are those going to be very unobtrusive? You're not going to notice them. Sacks mentions a book that he read where it's about recording what you actually see in your eyeballs, through your eyeballs, into your brain, and that is then what you can then replay later. I remember a great film, and it's quite prescient, called Strange Days, where people would record their lives and specific events and then be able to replay them to themselves or sell those to others. And this is maybe the direction we're going with things like Neuralink, where we'll be able to directly access what we experience and be able to process that and potentially save it for later replay. That may be the future of wearables, are actually going to be somewhat embedded and implanted inside of you. And this is where Friedberg's background comes in for today. This is a scene from the movie Her, in which the protagonist, Joaquin Phoenix, is talking to a person in his ear, but it's an AI that he falls in love with. So not only is he disintermediated from the person, he never sees them in real life, it's not even a real person that he's falling in love with. So a very prescient background for this discussion. The last topic was on sports betting. This has become a huge industry with companies making a lot of money, a lot of taxes being paid to local governments, and also a lot of money flowing into these leagues and into the players themselves. What's also happening is cheating. And this is a story about a player, not one of the best, who was making some money on the side by betting on very unlikely events that he could influence while he was playing. Unfortunately, what he didn't know is that the betting companies share this data with the leagues. They found out, and now he's been banned for life. Discussion shifted to whether sports betting is actually a good thing. They remarked at how addictive it really is. These apps are really, really good, and they're focusing on people who've got some spare cash and spending this money. But we know that gambling is a very addictive pastime and can be very destructive for people's lives. It was compared perhaps with cannabis. Cannabis can be bad for you, but we should allow people the choice to do this or not, and we shouldn't be restricting it. I think a better comparison would have been to look at the tobacco industry. In fact, that's made just as much money. And today, you would never think that it's a good thing for tobacco to be sponsoring the sports at the same level. So the question is still open, I think, as to whether in the future, sports betting, depending on its impact on families and on society, how it will be seen and whether this is a trend that will continue. Well, that brings me to the end of the review. Thanks very much. The bestie of the week is Jason Calacanis. It's great to have him back on the podcast, but his reason for winning the award is him talking about his scams when he was growing up. So he was a bit of a naughty boy. He got involved in a bit of shoplifting, pirating films, pirating software, making fake parking permits. He definitely knows how to make money. Let's hope in more scrupulous ways these days. The award for the worst comment this week, unfortunately, goes to David Sachs, him comparing sports betting to cannabis. I really think he missed a big opportunity there to talk about it in terms of the tobacco industry and what's happened there. Fortunately for Sachs, I'm also giving him the award for the best commentary today, and it was his discussion around Israel potentially having their Vietnam moment. Bear in mind, Sachs is Jewish, and so he's expressed a lot of support for Israel, and for him to be critical at this moment and to be supportive potentially of these protesters, I think was a very balanced and objective commentary. Thank you. Well, enjoy the clip as I play out with it. Please like and subscribe and watch the next episode review. Thank you. Goodbye.
How we view these protesters at Google can't just be judged now. I think it's going to have to be judged in the fullness of time based on how we perceive this war in Gaza. In Gaza, Israel faces a guerrilla-style force, and they're in a quagmire. And if you read the latest news that's coming out of Gaza, what you'll hear is that after Israel has supposedly cleared an area like Gaza City or Khan Yunis, they then move south. Hamas has popped back up again. This whole idea that they can clear an area has been proven false. It's like playing whack-a-mole. They basically hit Hamas in one area. Hamas disappears down the tunnels. They come back in a different area. And this is why you're seeing a lot of articles now in Haaretz, which is an Israeli newspaper, saying the war in Gaza is already lost. You had the Wall Street Journal last week run an article saying that Israel is winning every battle but losing the war, which is, again, shades of Vietnam here.